Welcome back, WNST season, and of course we'll be monitoring all things NFL draft as Luke and I go off to Indianapolis for the Combine in a couple of weeks and the draft and all that good stuff coming up. But it is baseball season, and I don't know how long baseball season's going to last here this year for the Orioles. Certainly heading into spring training, it would be nice to know who the third starter is, let alone the fourth and the fifth and anyone else. This guy is a lifer Baltimore Orioles fan. He is a book connoisseur as well as an editor, former editor at the Sporting News. Now you can find him out on Twitter at JMcGuireMLB. He's also at Baseball Book Pod, where he does podcasts with book writers and is about to begin an Orioles podcast for Locked On. He is in Asheville, North Carolina, but don't let that fool you. He's got the interweb, and Masson comes in loud and clear down there in the foothills of North Carolina. We welcome Justin McGuire, one of our defending champions, back on the eve of the spring training that I think we all dread, Justin McGuire. This is the year for the first time in a long time, and we had about a dozen of these that I did radio on every minute of every day, where the Orioles can't win this year. And as an Oriole fan and a lifer Oriole fan, I don't know that there's a whole lot to explain this that goes beyond the bizarre nature of the ownership here.
Yeah, it is kind of staggering that they're going into pitchers and catchers reporting with really two rotation guys locked in. You know, Dylan Bundy and Kevin Gossman are the only guys we know for sure are going to be in this rotation. And other than that, it's flip a coin for a bunch of guys you've never heard of for the most part, or a few of them maybe who were in the bullpen last year. And, you know, the Orioles always have a bit of uncertainty this time of year under Dan Duquette particularly. They've tended to make moves late into spring training, but this is a very extreme example with this rotation particularly. And, you know, I know that nobody has really signed a lot of free agents yet, but they got to get something done, or else this rotation could be worse than last year's, which is saying something.
You know, you say under Duquette. I don't, you know, I'm one of those guys that will always dispute that and say Duquette's not really running the place. I don't think Duquette really gives much of a rat's ass at this point. It's pretty obvious that he's not going to be here and they're not going to win. It is a very, very, I think, uncomfortable time for everybody in an organization that has really had a lot of discomfort, you know, over the course of time for the people that have run the place or been in charge of making decisions. Lame duck manager, lame duck general manager, lame duck center fielder, lame duck franchise shortstop, third baseman, whatever it's going to be. Relief pitcher gets injured before you can deal him off. You know, if you're writing the book on this, you know, it does have to come back to an 89-year-old senile owner who's not really in charge but is in charge and kind of hides like the Wizard of Oz. There's no accountability for all of this, and certainly Dan Duquette's going to be gone 7 months from now, if not already sort of psychologically.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly looks that way. I mean, you know, like you said, it's 2018 is a year when everybody's contract comes off the books, basically. I mean, it's just odd how it's worked out this way. But, yeah, I mean, it seems very unlikely Duquette will come back. I mean, I don't know about Buck, but it seems probably unlikely he'll be back as well. Adam Jones doesn't seem too happy with the state of things. We know Manny Machado's gone with him. I think the only question is whether they do trade him during the season or just wait and let him walk after the season, which means 2019 is going to be, if anything, even worse than 2018. But at least maybe we'll have a little more clarity on the future at that point. And that's what's frustrating about this team to me. And we've talked about this many times, but they needed to make a decision at some point a few years ago, I think, to start a rebuild. And they refused to do that, and they refuse to do it even now, like that we showed with their inability to do anything with Machado, or unwillingness to do anything with Machado in this offseason, when maybe they could have gotten at least a few decent prospects for him, and they just didn't do it. I think that probably goes back to Peter Angelos as well. That I think he was the one saying basically he didn't want to do anything. They were asking way too much for a guy who's only got 1 year left on his contract. And, you know, the process of starting the rebuild, it could have started a year and a half ago. It could have started a year ago. Could have started at the trade deadline last year. And they just steadfastly refused to do it. And they're seems like they're pretending they're going to be a contender this year. They're pretending they're going to go for it, or at least go for something. And it's hard to see how that's actually going to happen. I mean, I don't know, this kind of these half measures, I guess, that they always go through. That's what's frustrating to me. It's like you're not really a contender, but you're not really tanking either.
Justin McGuire can be found out on Twitter at @JMcGuireMLB. Also, you're doing an Oriole podcast, right? I want to give you a chance to promote that and talk about that a little bit. Certainly, I do a lot of Oriole podcasts here as well, and I know you're working for a group called Locked On as well, where they're doing podcasts for all this. From an Oriole podcast perspective on a weekly basis, how long do you really think that this team will remain something we can even talk about into June? I mean, at this point, looking at it, not knowing who's going to pitch on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday every week, I have grave concerns about them being relevant at all if they were to get out of the box 2-6 or something, that there's even going to be a season here, which is what I'm really concerned about. And, I've talked to Luke, who's my Kimosabi and podcast partner here at WNST.net, who covers the Orioles. The weird part about all of this is they might still, at 10 games under 500, think they're still in the running on July 20th somehow, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. With the second wild card, it's kind of fool's gold, but it lends teams that are mediocre at best to thinking they're contenders. And that's sort of what happened with the Orioles last year. They were just good enough that they could say, well, if things break right for us, maybe we could grab that second wild card. And what seems to happen with them every year is that they actually, tend to get off to good starts. They just do well in April and kind of get themselves into a position where, you could see it if everything goes quite right way. Maybe they could win 89 games. I don't think that's going to happen with this team, but you never know. I sort of with you, if they get off to a bad start, it's really, it's hard to see them recovering from that. If they're going to do anything, they're going to have to be consistent from the get-go. They're going to have to win some games in April. And with the current rotation, that's hard to see, but the current rotation is not going to be the rotation on opening day. I don't think they are going to end up making some moves. It's just a question of what moves. And there's a lot of pitchers out there who are kind of veteran retread kind of guys like Jason Vargas that maybe they end up with a couple of guys like that who can at least tread water for them a little bit more than the guys they have now. But yeah, I've been looking at the various projections for them from different places, and everybody essentially has them from anywhere from like 69 to maybe 75 wins. That seems to be what people are predicting, and that's going to be 4th or 5th place. And I think that's probably about right. I don't think this team is going to be. I don't think we're going to be at the All-Star break thinking, oh man, this team really has a shot.
This is a baseball problem, isn't it, Justin? The notion of the C word being thrown around here as we're in Valentine's Day week and pitchers and catchers reporting on both coasts, and 100 Major League Baseball players, not garbage players, like legitimate, proven Major League Baseball players are being pretty much locked out at this point, right? And, obviously the mudslinging that's going on all of our lifetimes now, going back to Andy Messersmith and Kurt Flood and Black and White and Charlie Finley and Marvin Miller and Don Fear and all that's entailed. And I've been talking baseball on the radio for 27 years now, and there's rarely been a time where you can talk about it as an educated fan without talking about labor, without talking about collusion, and without talking about money being spent, where it's all going. This is an industry issue right now that the Players Association sees as a tremendous act of war to have homestead homie camps in 2018 to house players who are Major League Baseball caliber but unsigned at this point.
All right. Well, I think it is kind of interesting. This has all kind of come to a head this year, but this has been a long time coming, I think, because the system that baseball has in place, I don't think is ultimately going to be sustainable. And what I mean by that is we have a system where players they have to play under market value their first 6 years or so, right? Somebody like Manny Machado is not making nearly as much money as he would make if he was just simply able to go out and go to the highest bidder. Whereas guys in their 30s are making more than they're really worth at this point. So it's kind of a system where players don't get paid as much as they could get in their 20s and get probably more than they're worth in their 30s. And that's it's been a system that it's been in place for a while, but it seems like the owners are starting to balk at the second part of that, which is paying players in their 30s when they're in the downward spiral of their careers, as opposed to paying, but they're not paying them at the beginning part either because they don't have to. And so the players are saying, I think, look, this has kind of been part of the deal is that we understand we're not getting full market value in our 20s, and we're going to recover that on the other end in our 30s. And if the owners are saying, well, we don't really want to do that anymore, then that's where the conflict comes up. And I don't know how you resolve that, except maybe under the next CBA, maybe it's something's going to have to change in terms of how quickly players can get to free agency and that kind of thing. But it's a problem because we're starting to get to a point where ownership really is recognizing the futile nature of giving these huge contracts to guys who are 31, 32 years old. You look at Albert Pujols, you look at Josh Hamilton, you look at in the Orioles case, you look at Chris Davis. People giving these contracts out, and they're just not going to get any kind of return on them because the players just don't have the ability to or don't have the value that they need to produce for the money they're getting.
I guess this brings us to a very difficult time for Adam Jones, right? Folks would say, well, they haven't even talked to him. I think he's been relatively brazen about where this organization is going and where the ownership's going. He's been around. He as Luke always points out, he's the most astute guy in the room. He knows everything about what's going on everywhere. He knows how bad the circumstance is. And, I saw him out on Twitter, but even for him at the end of this year, not only would the Orioles probably not give him that 3-year, $45 million extension that a guy like him would probably have his agent tell him that he deserves and should be getting at this point in his career where he's not in his prime, but certainly is still a valued Major League Baseball player. He would be the guy who is a part of the Homestead Homies right now if this year were next year, right?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, he's that kind of guy I think we're talking about where, again, he's in his 30s. His most productive days are behind him for sure. I mean, I can't imagine that that's not the case. And, how much are teams going to be willing to pay for this part of Adam Jones's career? The next 4 to 5 years of his career or the next 3 years, whatever he's asking for next year. It's hard to imagine he's going to get a big payday that maybe he would have gotten had he had this come up 5 years ago or even 2 years ago. Absolutely. I think it's going to be a tough market for him next year, especially because you look at it's a market of Manny Machado and Bryce Harper and Josh Donaldson. There's going to be so many big name position player free agents next year that Adam Jones is going to be pretty much an afterthought, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, and then there's the afterthought of Manny Machado, which is its own blossoming thing, and maybe this is for the market too. And I know we've all predicted that Machado is going to get $300 million and whatever, however much money that's going to be. Certainly in this environment, in this offseason where everybody has put the brakes on money, it's going to be very interesting to see where the bidding goes for him and for Harper and these other guys. That Machado sits around and says, well, maybe it won't be $300 million, and maybe there won't be 5 teams ready to wave mad money at me. But we've always seen through the history of baseball, the best players get paid, and the best players coming into their prime would get paid. So whereas the Adam Joneses of the world and his kind have no offers, I don't know that it's going to affect the top of the market, but it still is stupid money when you compare it to Pujols or any of these other deals where the back end of that money is going to be bad, even if your name is A-Rod and you're going to the Hall of Fame, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing for Machado and for Harper that makes their situations a little bit different is that they're a bit younger. They both came up to the major leagues at 19 years old, and so their free agency comes when they're still more or less in their prime. We're not talking that these guys aren't 30, 32. They're still in their 20s, and that's certainly going to make a big difference, I think, in terms of their perceived value. Of course, for Manny in particular, what does he do this year? I mean, we know he had a bit of an off year last year, particularly in the first half. if he comes back and has the kind of year we know he's capable of having and is more like his normal career path, if he has that kind of year this year, where he's an all-star and a MVP candidate, that kind of thing, then I think he is gonna be able to back up the Brinks truck next year. And Harper, I think, assuming he doesn't get injured or have any issues like that this year, again, I think he's going to be able to write his own check. It's the guys after that. It's the second-tier guys, the Adam Joneses, and the people like that who are in their 30s and aren't at that level in terms of value. They're the ones who are going to be in trouble next year, I think. Not trouble, but they're not going to have the market that they thought they were going to have. I think that's pretty safe to say.
Justin McGuire can be found at J McGuire. That's McGuire MLB, out on Twitter as well as Baseball Book Podcasts. And he's going to be doing an Orioles podcast for Locked On as well during the season. Last thing for you, Buck. Buck doesn't like losing. As much as Adam Jones knows what's going on here in this organization, I would think that Buck knows where every bone is buried in this thing. And not only are the Orioles not going to spring training with pitching, Buck Showalter's not going to spring training with pitching. And I would think, given his sort of cantankerous past and his strong-willed and his mindfulness about all of this and his astute knowledge of the game, he knows the score here, too. He's in the last year of his deal. And, the perception that he would be bumped up into the front office. I've talked to a lot of people around baseball that don't think that's a very good idea, that they believe a general manager is a way different job. It's like trying to turn a lawyer into a doctor, right? It's a different gig at this point in the world. But Buck is in the middle of all of this. Buck will be the face before the games in the dugout with the cheery face when they're 15 games under 500. Buck will be the guy in the post-game press conference having to make excuses for why the ERA's 7 when last year it already was pretty bad. He had to make those excuses night after night. But Buck going into his last year, Buck will get a gig next year. I mean, Buck will have a number of opportunities to go win somewhere. And the one thing we all know about Buck ain't ever won, and that burns at Buck.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that he is the biggest mystery to me anyway in terms of what's going to happen. We talked about all these guys whose contracts are up, after the 2018 season. He's the one I'm least sure of in my mind what's going to happen, because it wouldn't shock me to see him come back. But it also, of course, wouldn't shock me to see him leave. Either the Orioles decide to move on or he decides to move on. Neither of those scenarios would shock me either. And like you said, I think if he wants to keep managing, you would think he would have some opportunities. He's got a proven track record, and we know that there's always teams looking for managing at the end of the year. So you would think he would have opportunities, but again, at his age, maybe he starting over someplace isn't what he wants. I'm kind of with you that in terms of the way the general manager's position and the front office positions have evolved over time, I don't think, the old baseball lifers like Buck Showalter are necessarily what teams are looking for in the front offices anymore. In fact, he's kind of a throwback just even as an on-field manager. He's kind of a throwback to the way managers used to be, and more of these guys are not like that. They're more, extensions of the front office as opposed to independent entities in their own right. And I think he's still in that old model. So I don't know if one of these more analytically advanced front offices would have as much interest in him, who's going to be more independent than in bringing in a former player with no managerial experience, which seems to be the way that a lot of those ones go. So yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying I don't have a good sense of what the future is going to be for Buck Showalter.
Well, I don't think we have a real good sense of what the future of the Orioles is going to be, right? With an 89-year-old senile owner who is never seen, never heard from. The offseason was a mess. I think for everyone who's an Oriole fan, it's a very, very murky crystal ball right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is extremely murky. I think it's like we've mentioned, there's so many guys who are key parts of this organization and have been key parts of the success they had for 5 years or so before last year, who are all not going to be under contract in 2019, unless there's some extensions given at some point. So we know, Machado, Jones, Duquette, Buck Showalter, Zach Britton, all these guys potentially are going to be gone, and very well may be gone. And it's we're sort of back to square one with the Orioles. We're back to a new beginning of some sort, and it really would seem to me to be the ideal time to do go in on a rebuild. Just go in on, we're going to understand that we're going to be a losing team for several years, but we're going to try to accumulate some good draft picks. We're going to save some money on payroll. We're going to evaluate younger players.
We're still going to have the hot dog races and the crab races at the games, right?
Exactly, yeah. And we're just going to sort of accept that, the way the Astros did and the way the Cubs did to a lesser extent, we're going to accept there's going to be a few years of just god-awful baseball and last-place finishes, and things are going to look pretty grim. But at the end of that, we come out of it maybe with a core group of young players who are capable of winning. And that, to me, seems like would be the way to go in 2019. But I sort of thought that was the way to go in 2018 and maybe even 2017. And it's just never, they don't seem to have any interest in going in on a rebuild. Even in those really bleak years, 1998 to 2011, when they were always bad, they never really fully committed to a rebuild. They were always bringing in the Javi Lopez's and the guys, they were bringing in free agents, Miguel Tejada, and never fully committed to being, a team that was going to be young and rebuilding.
Justin McGuire can be found at J McGuire MLB out on Twitter, as well as the Baseball Book podcast that he does, and at Locked On, coming soon to an Oriole fan podcast near you. Always great to talk Oriole baseball with you, and I'm sorry that in the future here it looks like it's going to be bleak conversation between you and I, but I shall stay in touch here during spring training, and eventually they'll get a number 3 starter, right, Just?
Well, they're going to have somebody pitch in the third game of the season. So, I suspect they will end up signing a couple of retread free agent types, and then trying to fill the rest, the 4th or 5th spot with some of these guys we've heard of who've been in the Mike Wrights of the world. And it's going to be a rotation that's not going to inspire much confidence, but hey,
at least Machado's going to play shortstop for a couple of weeks, right?
Well, that seems to be the idea, to have him at shortstop. Now, I'd say for him, that sort of increases his value considerably. So I understand why he'd want to do it. If he shows he has the ability to play shortstop at the major league level, for 150 games, then his value next year is even more than it's already going to be. So I understand why he wants to do it. And we'll see. I mean, he seems like he has the range to do it. So we'll see.
Hey, always a pleasure, man. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you on the other side out there on Twitter, all right?
Okay, all right, thanks.
Justin McGuire, J. McGuire, MLB, the way to find him out on Twitter, an Oriole historian, editor, and now podcasting with baseball books as well as the Orioles with Locked On. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Easy to find us day or night. Nasty at WNST.net. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and of course streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube. We're getting that all sorted out this week as well. The Ray Lewis bus trip is sorted out. We're going to involve some baseball. We're going to see the Tribe play and the Pirates play as well as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but we will see Ray's speech. We will tour the Hall of Fame. It will be a Purple Beauty the weekend of August 2nd. All the details up at the website at WNST.net under the Road Trips tab. We'd love to have you with us in Canton. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.